Ray, could you please describe what the Brenthurst Foundation is and what you do there?
Yeah, so the Brenthurst Foundation tries to provide rational economic policy advice to governments on their request and to also produce publications and opinion articles that try and strengthen making rational policy choices.
So is it basically like a think tank?
Yeah.
And who comprises this foundation, the people who gather this information?
Well, we have our director is Dr. Greg Mills, and he's got an incredible number of books that he's published and so on. And then we have a research team. We're quite a small organization. Yeah.
Ray, what do you look out for when you observe and process South African news?
I think what we're looking for is, are we making the right policy choices and are we implementing those policies? I think those are the two things. I mean, are we positioning ourselves correctly, making the right policy choices? Are we going to get growth going in South Africa? Is the multi-billion-dollar question.
And this all based on, I mean, when you're talking about the right policy choices, what are you basing that on? On the economy?
Yeah, essentially, I think the main thing that we need to do in South Africa, having undergone the big political transition of 1994 and the subsequent decades, is to actually get our economy going, because it's stalling and it's not, it's simply not growing at a pace that's fast enough to accommodate the people who are entering the labor market. And so you see this rising unemployment and instability.
And what do you make of South Africa's stance when it comes to Russia and Ukraine?
Yeah, so I think South Africa is making a bad decision, essentially, to align itself with Russia. It claims to be neutral and non-aligned, but if you look at its actions, its frequent visits to Moscow and entertaining the Russian foreign minister here, and at these briefings, he's described, and Russia is described as a great friend of South Africa. We've held military exercises with Russia on the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. The ANC has sent its youth league to the occupied areas of Ukraine, where they have reported that everything is just fantastic and wonderful and democratic, which is just ludicrous. So their actions really betray that they have taken sides. And this has been noticed by a lot of their counterparts, particularly in the West.
Speaking of the West in particular, the ANC has also made reference to it being unfair and wanting to focus on atrocities that are of interest to them. And when it comes to Africa, not so much of an interest. What do you make of that? Do you find that to be legitimate?
No, I don't really. I mean, I think that the ANC talks about multilateralism and the importance of that. But when multilateral institutions, such as the United Nations and the European Union, where Ukraine is located, make decisions about the invasion of Ukraine being an act of aggression that should be stopped, they don't go along with that. And I think the world looks to the AU to lead in Africa, and that has been the case, and South Africa has played a role there, certainly in peacekeeping in parts of Africa. So, when there has been, Western intervention forces and so on sent to assist with stabilization in Africa, this has often been criticized as, sort of, you shouldn't be here, this is not your continent. So you can't have your cake and eat it.
Just give us your views on South Africa, the blip that President Ramaphosa made when he had announced that South Africa would be withdrawing from the ICC. And then that was later quickly corrected to say that, no, in fact, it's not a withdrawal. But they do have concerns with the IEC, which organizations like the Helen Suzman Foundation have noted to say that there are problems in the ICC, but perhaps the ANC is using it for self-interest and the motive behind it is different.
Yeah, I think if you go back to December last year at the ANC's conference, the matter was discussed and debated, and a resolution was passed. And that resolution said that the ANC was satisfied with the reforms that were being undertaken at the ICC, and that it would no longer wish to withdraw from the ICC. And the Minister of Justice then withdrew the bill that had been tabled to withdraw South Africa from the ICC. He did that in March. So the ANC position has been very clear that they want to be in the ICC, that they've looked at the flaws in the ICC and they see them being corrected. So what has happened here is that their friend is now under investigation and there's a warrant for his arrest issued by the ICC. So this has made things very awkward for them. Do they arrest Putin when he comes to South Africa or not? And so I think you see in Ramaphosa's misstatement really a reflection of ANC anxiety. I'm sure that's what the ANC actually thinks, is that in retrospect, we should have pulled out and now we're stuck with this problem. But unfortunately, you know, a resolution of an ANC conference can only be changed at the next conference. And they're actually bound by that resolution. And it would look very, I think, unprofessional and amateurish to simply overrule a party resolution like that.
Do you think, should President Putin step foot in South Africa in August for the BRICS summit, do you think he will be arrested?
I think there will be a crisis of some sort. I think that a lot of organizations and, you know, in the NGO space and those who were involved in taking the court action to get al-Bashir arrested when he came to South Africa, which didn't happen, will be ready and will be ready to compel the South African government to make that arrest. I think they will do everything they can not to arrest Putin. So whether that involves them perhaps going to court and to try and obtain some kind of clarification on anything that delays and strings out the process while Putin is here and then hopefully leaves before there's an outcome, I think will be undertaken.
Because there is already talk about, a workaround around this, a legal workaround around it to see how to square the circle. Do you think it's doable or even possible by August?
Well, it is possible that they could pass legislation which exempts foreign heads of state from being arrested on South African soil, or sitting heads of state. That could be done, but legislation in a democracy is not something you can just fling down from the executive and put on the statute books. It goes through a process, and there would have to be sittings, there would have to be public hearings, it would have to conform with the Constitution. There would be legal questions about the conflict of this legislation with our accession to the ICC protocols and whether that's acceptable. So there's a whole long process and there's no way that would be done by August. So I think that might be an option that's tried out of desperation, or maybe just as a sort of a fig leaf to cover up the problem of why they didn't arrest him.
All right, you have followed President Ramaphosa and even written a biography about him. Would you say he's lived up to the initial Ramaphosa expectations?
No, I think it's been, in some respects, I think yes. I think that he has been very hard on state capture. He has tried to reform the prosecuting authority and put new staff in there. Unfortunately, when it comes to economic reforms, I think he's been very slow. And when it comes to positioning of South Africa, for example, with Russia on this particular issue, I think he's been very bad.
What do you think that in particular has done, this whole Russia friendship, the ICC confusion, and all that anxiety has done to brand Ramaphosa and also brand South Africa, considering our stature as, one of the best democracies in the world?
I think that is exactly the point, because we're a democracy, we're an open, free society, and we should be among the other democracies and open, free societies of the world in our geopolitical alignment. And I'm not talking here about the West. I'm talking about Kenya. I'm talking about Zambia. I'm talking about Ghana. I'm talking about, these big African countries that have embraced democracy and openness and see that as the way forward. So that's where we should be, and our instinct should be to use the principles that were in that constitution that Ramaphosa very much identified with and was very much involved with drafting to guide our foreign policy. And it's very disappointing that he hasn't done that. I think he places party unity above all else. And that means accommodating a lot of people in the ANC who have some very dodgy associations and alignments.
Ray, why would you say the ANC wants South Africa to be associated with Russia?
The ANC's argument is that it has historical associations with Russia that go way back to the struggle days. And it's true, Russia did support the ANC in exile, did support the struggle against apartheid. And but it's more nuanced than that. I mean, the first groupings of ANC exiles that went for training in Russia were trained in Ukraine, at Odessa and other places in Ukraine. So that, it's a bit simplistic to sort of now historically associate Russia and not Ukraine with that history. They have equal share of it. So I think that's a weak argument. And I also think the Russia of today is not the Russia of then. It is now a pretty messed up country. I mean, it's politically very oppressive. The opposition leaders are in jail on trumped up charges. There is military control of the society. People are arrested if they mention the war in Ukraine. It's a very oppressive system, and not one which is at all aligned with where South Africa is now. So to continue in the present to associate on the basis of that history, I think is problematic.
In your conversations with clients, what kinds of concerns are they raising, and what are you advising them?
I think there's generally concern for South Africa's alignment. This country is supposed to be a leading democratic country. We are still a leading democratic country, by the way. I mean, we have regular elections, we have an independent media, we have all of the open, free association that you would expect in a democratic country. But we have this strange alignment. And it makes it difficult, I think, for other African countries, certainly where we've worked, to understand, why South Africa is deviating in this way. Whereas a lot of these African countries are emerging from one-party systems, from undemocratic pasts, and trying to open their countries up and implement reforms. And here is South Africa sort of going the other way.
Ray, is it as simple as leave or criticize the ICC equals bad?
I think it is if you voluntarily joined it and then reaffirmed that you've voluntarily joined it and that you want to be part of it, then you need to live up to the expectations that result from that voluntary association. If you're going to leave and live with the consequences of that. I think that it was the vision of Nelson Mandela to join the ICC. And it was certainly, it's significant. I mean, the fact that his signature is on the Rome Statutes of the ICC has got to count for something. It was a bold statement about how this country wanted an international criminal court that would bring to book people who act in violation of international law.
Ray, when you're speaking to your clients, would you say, I mean, here we are, we've been grey listed now. Are these all separate things, or can they be linked?
Yeah, we have fewer friends in the room when these international forums meet to discuss things like grey listing. Japan didn't invite us to the G7 meeting in Japan. So we've been at that meeting, and Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, Jacob Zuma, and Cyril Ramaphosa have attended that meeting since we became a democracy. The G7 has said, this is an important country in Africa. We really need to hear what South Africa has to say. And we weren't invited to the last one, and it's very significant. It's a very significant loss of status, of global status. So these things do have an effect. And I think investors are also nervous because there are massive sanctions against Russia and its network of oligarchs. And they're nervous that, their investments in South Africa might start interacting with those oligarchs and their and they don't want their money to be affected in that way.